Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Cameron Davis, and I should have known something was wrong the moment my radio crackled to life at 6:47 a.m., interrupting Sarah's goodbye kiss and the kids' sticky-fingered hugs that smelled like maple syrup and strawberry shampoo. Unit 23, we have a code yellow. Missing person, Olympic National Park, Hoh River Trail. Family reports Jordan Clark, 24-year-old female, last seen yesterday evening around 1800 hours. Respond immediately. I looked back at my kitchen table where Emma was drawing me another good luck daddy picture in purple crayon, and Tyler was trying to feed his scrambled eggs to our golden retriever, Max. Sarah caught my eye and gave me that look, the one that said, "Come home safe. We need you." 10-4 dispatch, Unit 23 responding. ETA 20 minutes. I grabbed my gear bag, kissed Sarah one more time, and promised Emma I'd be back for her soccer game at 4 p.m. That was the last normal moment of my life. The drive to Hoh River Trailhead took me through the heart of the Olympic Peninsula's old-growth forest, where Douglas firs older than Christ himself stretched toward a gray October sky. My GPS showed the coordinates, 47.8606 degren, 123.9348 degW. 23 years as a ranger, and I'd worked hundreds of missing person cases. Most ended with sheepish hikers emerging from the wrong trail, dehydrated but alive. But something felt different about this one. My Motorola radio kept picking up strange interference, fragments of classical music bleeding through the static like auditory ghosts. I met Jordan's parents, Mike and Linda Clark, at the trailhead parking lot. Linda's eyes were swollen from crying, and Mike's hands shook as he lit his fourth cigarette in 10 minutes. Their daughter had been an experienced hiker, they said, music student at University of Washington. She'd come to the forest to find inspiration for her senior composition project. "She's been obsessed with this story," Linda whispered, clutching a printout of an old newspaper article. "About some composer who died out here in 1923. Daniel Whitmore. She said she needed to complete his work." The newspaper clipping was from the Seattle Times, October 15, 1923. Composer found dead in Olympic Forest. Body discovered in remote ravine. Unfinished symphony beside remains. Mike pulled me aside. "Ranger Davis, she's been acting strange lately, humming this melody over and over. Same few bars like a broken record. When we asked her about it, she'd get this distant look and say she had to finish what was started." My stomach muscles contracted like a fist closing. I'd heard about Daniel Whitmore in Ranger folklore, the mad composer who'd vanished into the forest claiming he could hear the true song of the wilderness. They'd found his skeleton 3 weeks later, clutched around sheet music for something called Symphony of the Eternal Forest. The final movement was missing. "We'll find her," I told the Clarks, my voice steadier than my racing pulse. "I'm going to bring your daughter home." The Hoh River Trail started innocently enough, a well-maintained boardwalk through temperate rainforest where moss hung like green funeral shrouds from every branch. I followed Jordan's trail sign, size 7 Merrill hiking boots, distinctive waffle pattern in the mud. According to her parents, she'd been carrying a small digital recorder to capture natural sounds for her composition. At mile marker 2.3, I found her first night's campsite. The tent was still standing, sleeping bag neatly rolled, camp stove unused. But her backpack was gone, along with her recorder and any indication of which direction she'd headed. That's when I heard it for the first time. A melody, faint as whispered prayer, drifting through the forest canopy. Not quite classical, not quite natural. Something in between that made my teeth ache and my vision blur slightly at the edges. 4 ascending notes, then a haunting descent that seemed to burrow into my brainstem and take up residence. Da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum. I shook my head violently, trying to dislodge the musical parasite. My radio crackled with that strange interference again, but this time I could make out the melody mixed with the static. The same 4-note phrase repeating endlessly. Jordan, I called into the green cathedral around me. Jordan Clark, can you hear me? My voice echoed back distorted, as if the trees themselves were harmonizing with my shouts. I followed what looked like Jordan's boot prints off the main trail into a section of forest that didn't appear on any map. The GPS coordinates on my Garmin kept shifting. One moment reading 47.8642 dig N, 123.9401 dig W, the next showing coordinates that placed me somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The melody grew stronger as I hiked deeper and louder. By noon, it was playing constantly in my head, a psychic radio station I couldn't turn off. My hands started trembling, not from cold, but from something else. Something that felt like static electricity building in my bones. Da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum. At 1:30 p.m., I found Jordan's backpack hanging from a Douglas fir branch 20 feet off the ground. No way she could have thrown it there. No way anyone could have climbed that smooth bark without specialized gear. The pack hung there like a grotesque ornament, swaying in a wind I couldn't feel. Inside the pack, her wallet, her cell phone, battery dead, energy bars, water bottles, but no digital recorder, and no Jordan. I tried radioing for backup, but my Motorola only produced that haunting melody, now mixed with what sounded like screaming. High-pitched, desperate screaming that might have been wind through the trees, or might have been something much worse. The boot prints continued deeper into the forest, but they were changing. The heel impressions were getting deeper, as if Jordan was carrying increasing weight, or as if gravity itself was pulling her down toward something hungry. By 3 p.m., I should have turned back. Protocol dictated calling in a full search team, helicopters, dogs. But the melody in my head was getting louder, more insistent, and I could feel it tugging me forward like an invisible leash around my brainstem. My rational mind knew I was being influenced by whatever had taken Jordan, but my family man's heart wouldn't let me abandon someone's daughter in this green hell. I thought about Emma's soccer game, about Tyler's bedtime story ritual, about Sarah's hand in mine during our Sunday morning coffee. These memories became anchors, tethering me to sanity as the cursed symphony tried to rewrite my neural pathways. But the music was stronger here, ancient, hungry, da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum. The melody was inside my bloodstream now, synchronizing with my heartbeat. Each pulse sent musical notes ricocheting through my nervous system like auditory bullets. My left eye started twitching in rhythm with the phantom orchestra in my skull. At 3:45 p.m., I found the first body. A hiker, maybe 6 months dead, sitting upright against a moss-covered log. His skeletal hands were positioned as if conducting an invisible orchestra, and his jaw hung open in a final silent note. Around his neck hung a tarnished harmonica, corroded green with age. But the corpse wasn't what made my bladder nearly release and my breathing fracture into panicked gasps. It was the fact that the skeleton was swaying slightly, keeping time with the melody in my head. Da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum. I stumbled backward, my Danner boots catching on exposed roots. The dead man's empty sockets seemed to track my movement, and his jaw moved up and down as if singing along to the cursed symphony. That's when I noticed the others. Scattered through the forest in a rough circle, maybe 30 corpses in various stages of decay. All positioned as if conducting, all swaying in perfect synchronization. Hikers, campers, maybe even other rangers. Anyone unlucky enough to hear Daniel Whitmore's unfinished masterpiece. And in the center of this macabre orchestra pit, sitting cross-legged with her back to me, was Jordan Clark. She was alive but barely recognizable as human. Her blonde hair had gone completely white, and her skin had taken on a translucent quality that revealed the network of veins beneath like purple road maps. She held her digital recorder in her lap, and I could see her finger hovering over the record button. Jordan? My voice came out as a hoarse whisper. She turned toward me and I nearly vomited. Her eyes had hemorrhaged completely, leaving dark crimson pools where blue irises should have been. Blood trickled from her ears in steady streams, but she was smiling. The most peaceful, terrifying smile I'd ever seen. "Ranger Davis," she said, her voice harmonizing with itself like a human chord. "I've been waiting for you." The symphony needs an audience for its completion. The melody in my head crescendoed to a deafening roar. I could feel blood beginning to seep from my own ears, warm and thick as maple syrup. My vision started fragmenting, reality breaking apart like a shattered stained glass window. Da-da-da-dum. Da-da-da-dum. Jordan, we need to leave. Now. Your parents are worried sick. They love you. I forced the words out through gritted teeth, using thoughts of my own family as armor against the supernatural compulsion. She laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass mixed with church bells. Love? Ranger Davis, you don't understand. This is love. Pure, eternal love. The forest's love. Daniel's love. The symphony's love for all of us. She pressed the record button. The world exploded into music, not sound, music. Living, breathing, thinking music that invaded every cell of my body simultaneously. I could feel my DNA rewriting itself to better conduct the cursed melody. My bones became tuning forks, my blood became rhythm, my screaming became harmony. The skeletal orchestra around us began moving more frantically, their conducting becoming more animated as the symphony fed on my terror. I could see them decomposing and regenerating in real time, caught in an endless cycle of death and resurrection powered by Whitmore's musical cancer. Da-da-da-dum. Da-da-da-dum. But then I heard it, faint but unmistakable. Emma's voice singing Happy Birthday from her last party. Tyler giggling as I chased him around the backyard. Sarah humming while making pancakes on Saturday mornings. My family's music, clean, pure, uncorrupted by supernatural hunger. I focused on these sounds, using them as weapons against Whitmore's symphony. Love versus obsession. Life versus eternal death. The music of home versus the music of damnation. Jordan! I screamed, forcing myself to move toward her despite every muscle fiber in my body rebelling against the motion. Remember your parents. Remember who you are. She looked at me with those blood-filled eyes, and for just a moment I saw the real Jordan Clark underneath the symphony's influence. Terrified, trapped, begging for help. I grabbed the digital recorder and smashed it against the nearest tree trunk. The device exploded in a shower of plastic and electronic components, and the forest fell silent for exactly 3 heartbeats. Then Jordan screamed. Not a human scream, a sound like reality tearing, like the universe having its vocal cords ripped out. The skeletal orchestra collapsed into dust piles, their century of conducting finally ended. The cursed melody stopped, but Jordan kept screaming as her body tried to purge the symphony from her nervous system. Blood poured from her eyes, nose, and mouth as supernatural music physically evacuated her brain through every available orifice. I caught her as she collapsed, her body convulsing like she was being electrocuted. "It's okay," I whispered, thinking of how I comforted Emma after her nightmares. "You're going to be okay. I'm getting you home." The hike out took 4 hours. Jordan drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally humming fragments of the cursed melody before catching herself and clamping her mouth shut. Her hair stayed white, and her eyes never fully healed, but she was alive. I carried her on my back for the last 2 miles, thinking about my promise to Emma, about Tyler's bedtime stories, about Sarah's morning coffee kisses. These thoughts kept the lingering musical fragments from taking root in my brain. The paramedics met us at the trailhead at 8:30 p.m. I'd missed Emma's soccer game, but when Sarah brought the kids to the hospital later that night, Emma just hugged me and said, "You saved someone's daughter, Daddy. That's more important than soccer." Jordan spent 3 weeks in the psychiatric ward of Harborview Medical Center. The doctors couldn't explain her white hair or the permanent damage to her retinas, but she was functional, human. The symphony's hold over her was broken. She never spoke about what happened in the forest, but sometimes I catch her humming. Normal songs now, top 40 hits and classical pieces that don't try to rewrite reality. She sends our family Christmas cards every year, and each one includes a personal note thanking me for bringing her back to the music of the living. The Olympic National Park Service officially lists the area where I found Jordan as indefinitely closed for environmental restoration. The real reason is simpler. Rangers still report hearing that four-note melody drifting through the trees on quiet nights. Daniel Whitmore's symphony is still out there, waiting for someone to complete its final movement. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed next to Sarah with our kids safe in their rooms down the hall, I can still hear it faintly in the distance. The cursed melody calling to me, promising eternal music in exchange for everything I love. Da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum. But I have my own music now. Emma singing in the shower. Tyler practicing violin, badly but enthusiastically. Sarah humming while she gardens. The symphony of home, family, love. Music powerful enough to drown out any curse. That's the music I choose to conduct. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like if you want more terrifying Ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror and comment your theory about what really happened to Jordan Clark. I read every single one. Would you ever be brave enough to venture into the Olympic National Park after reading this? What would you have done in Cameron's situation? Drop your thoughts below. My name is Tyler Brooks, and when 3 different hikers swore they saw Rachel Thompson in 3 impossible locations at the exact same time, I knew we were dealing with something that would shatter everything I thought I understood about reality. November 18, 2019, 2:47 p.m. The call came through on my radio while I was cataloging trail maintenance reports at Elkmont Ranger Station in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Static crackled, then dispatch's voice. Unit 7, we've got multiple 911 calls regarding missing hiker Rachel Thompson, age 24. Last known position. Well, that's the problem, Tyler. We've got 3 separate witness reports. I grabbed my notepad, mechanical pencil ready. After 8 years as a ranger, colleagues still called me the professor behind my back. My master's in environmental science and habit of actually reading incident reports apparently made me the go-to guy for weird cases. What they didn't know was that their dismissive attitudes had sharpened my analytical skills into something approaching supernatural intuition. Go ahead, dispatch. First witness, Marcus Chen, camping at Cosby Campground. Swears he saw a young woman matching Rachel's description, brown hair, blue North Face jacket, hiking boots, walking past his campsite at exactly 2:15 p.m. Says she looked disoriented, kept checking her phone. I scribbled notes. Cosby was 12 miles northeast of my current position. Second witness, Patricia Valdez, day hiker on Cataract Falls Trail. Reports seeing same description female at 2:15 p.m. near the falls overlook. Says the woman was sitting on the rocks, staring at the water, wouldn't respond when called to. My mechanical pencil stopped moving. Cataract Falls was 8 miles southeast of Cosby. Impossible for the same person to be at both locations simultaneously. Third witness gets weird, Tyler. Maintenance worker Jim Davidson was clearing debris from Roaring Fork Motor Nature Trail. Says at exactly 2:15 p.m., he saw a young woman in a blue jacket standing in the middle of the road, completely motionless. When he got out of his truck to check on her, she was gone. No trace. My respiração ficou superficial enquanto calculei as distâncias. Roaring Fork was 7 miles southwest of Cataract Falls, 15 miles from Cosby. The geometric impossibility made my vision narrow to a tunnel focus on my notepad. 3 locations, same time, same person. The laws of physics don't accommodate human bilocation. Tyler, you copy? 10-4, dispatch. Any additional details on the missing person? Rachel Thompson, 24, graduate student at University of Tennessee. Researching indigenous folklore for her anthropology thesis. Been camping solo in the backcountry for 3 days. Family reported her overdue when she missed her scheduled check-in this morning. Indigenous folklore. My mouth went dry as desert sand, saliva completely evaporating. I'd spent countless hours studying the pre-colonial history of these mountains, the Cherokee legends that most rangers dismissed as tourist attractions. The old stories spoke of entities that existed before European concepts of reality took root, beings that operated outside the constraints of linear time and singular existence. Dispatch, what was her research focus specifically? Let me check. Family says she was investigating stories about Nunahai, Cherokee spirit people. Also something about Kitua rituals and, hold on, blood drinkers that walk between worlds. Suor frio escorreu pelo meu pescoço mesmo com a temperatura de 45 graus na estação. Blood drinkers. The Cherokee had words for entities that fed on life essence, vampiric beings that predated European vampire mythology by thousands of years. But these weren't Hollywood monsters. These were cosmic parasites that existed partially outside our dimensional framework. Tyler, we need you to coordinate the search. You know that area better than anyone. Copy that. Initiating grid search protocol. We'll start with the Cosby sighting and work systematically through all reported locations. I gathered my gear. Garmin GPS, emergency radio, first aid kit, headlamp, emergency blanket, MREs for 2 days. My service weapon, a Glock 22, felt inadequate for reasons I couldn't yet articulate. The rational part of my brain cataloged standard search procedures, while something deeper whispered warnings about entities that existed before human understanding of existence itself. 4:23 p.m., Cosby Campground. I found Marcus Chen at campsite B12, a nervous software engineer from Knoxville whose hands trembled when he showed me the exact spot where he'd seen Rachel. She was right there. He pointed to a gap between two towering hemlocks, walking from east to west like she was following something I couldn't see. Her movements were wrong somehow, too fluid, like she was floating instead of walking. Did she acknowledge you? That's the thing. She looked directly at me, but her eyes, Marcus's voice cracked. They were completely black, not just the pupils, the entire visible portion. And when she smiled, her teeth seemed too sharp, too many. My fingertips went numb against the pen as I recorded his statement. Excessive dental structure was mentioned in several Cherokee accounts of Nunahai manifestations, beings that could mimic human appearance but never quite achieve biological accuracy. Anything else unusual? The temperature dropped maybe 20 degrees in the span of 10 seconds. My breath started fogging, and I could see frost forming on my tent. In November, at 2,000 feet elevation. Supernatural temperature anomalies. Classic dimensional bleed-through phenomenon. I thanked Marcus and drove toward Cataract Falls, my truck's heater struggling against an interior cold that had nothing to do with weather. 5:15 p.m., Cataract Falls Trail. Patricia Valdez, a retired nurse from Gatlinburg, met me at the parking area. Her clinical background made her observations particularly unsettling. I've seen people in shock, hypothermia, various medical crises, she explained as we hiked toward the fall's overlook, but I've never seen someone sit so perfectly still for so long without breathing. Not breathing? For the full 10 minutes I observed her, I never saw her chest rise or fall. She just sat on that rock. Patricia pointed to a granite boulder beside the cascading water, staring into the falls like she was reading something in the water patterns. We reached the overlook. The boulder showed clear indentations where someone had been sitting, but the rock surface was covered in a thin layer of frost despite the afternoon sun. More concerning were the dark stains around the indentations, stains that looked disturbingly like dried blood. When I called out to her, she turned toward me with that same impossible smile your other witness described. But here's what really scared me. When she stood up, I could see straight through her for just a split second, like she was a projection or hologram that hadn't fully materialized. Dimensional phasing. The entity was struggling to maintain coherent physical manifestation across multiple simultaneous locations. My hands started shaking uncontrollably as the implications crystallized. We weren't dealing with a missing person. We were dealing with something wearing Rachel Thompson's appearance while her actual fate remained unknown. 6:45 p.m. Roaring Fork Motor Nature Trail. Jim Davidson, a weathered maintenance worker with 30 years of park service, showed me the exact spot where he'd encountered the apparition. She was standing right here in the road. He gestured to a section of asphalt that showed scorched marks in a vaguely human silhouette. Wasn't moving, wasn't swaying, wasn't doing anything humans do automatically, just existing. How long between when you saw her and when you got out of your truck? maybe 15 seconds. But when I looked up after shutting off the engine, she was gone. No footprints, no sound of movement through the underbrush. Just gone. The scorched asphalt pattern made my stomach contract like someone was squeezing it with an iron fist. Heat signatures from paranormal manifestations often left permanent marks on surfaces. Evidence of energy expenditures beyond human comprehension. Jim, in your 30 years here, have you ever seen anything like this before? He glanced around nervously before lowering his voice. My Cherokee grandmother used to tell stories about the shadow walkers, beings that could split their essence across multiple places to hunt more efficiently. She said they showed up when someone had been marked by the old blood drinkers. Blood drinkers. Again. She ever mention how to identify someone who'd been marked? They start seeing impossible things. Reality stops making sense. The marked person becomes a lure to draw others into the entity's hunting ground. Jim's weathered face went pale. Tyler, what if Rachel Thompson isn't missing? What if she's already been changed and what people are seeing is the thing that took her, trying to use her appearance to draw more victims? My chest constricted like someone was wrapping steel cables around my ribcage. The 3 simultaneous sightings weren't random glitches in reality. They were a coordinated hunting strategy by something that existed partially outside our dimensional framework. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Tyler Brooks's situation? Comment below. 7:30 p.m. Back at my truck, I sat in the growing darkness trying to process the impossible evidence. My radio crackled with static that formed almost patterns like whispered voices in a language I couldn't quite identify. The temperature gauge in my truck read 23 degrees despite the dashboard thermometer showing 45. My phone buzzed. Text from my wife Sarah. Emma has soccer practice canceled. Homemaking chili. Love you. Stay safe out there. The simple normalcy of family life crashed against the cosmic horror I was uncovering, like warm light against infinite darkness. Emma, my 8-year-old daughter with her gap-toothed smile and endless questions about why trees grew so tall. Sarah, who'd supported my career change from academic research to park service, who trusted me to come home safely from every shift. I scrolled through my phone's photos. Emma's last birthday party, our family camping trip to Yellowstone, Sarah laughing at some terrible dad joke I'd made. These images anchored me to human reality, while something ancient and impossible circled just beyond perception. My GPS unit started displaying coordinates that didn't exist. 35.6 degree, 83.5 degree, 847 feet elevation. Negative elevation readings were impossible, but the device showed them consistently. The coordinates pointed to a location roughly 3 miles northeast of my current position, deep in the backcountry where few hikers ventured. I called dispatch. This is Unit 7. I'm pursuing a lead in the Thompson case. GPS coordinates. Actually, dispatch, my GPS is malfunctioning. I'm heading into grid section J7 to investigate possible evidence. Copy, Tyler. Maintain radio contact. Weather service is calling for temperature drops and possible fog development after sunset. Fog. Entities that existed between dimensions often generated atmospheric disturbances as they moved between states of existence. The approaching weather wasn't natural. It was a manifestation of something vast and ancient, stirring in response to my investigation. 8:15 p.m. I parked at the Old Settlers Trail trailhead and began hiking toward the impossible coordinates. My headlamp beam seemed to bend strangely, illuminating areas I wasn't directly pointing it toward while leaving obvious obstacles in mysterious shadow. The forest around me had gone completely silent. No insects, no wind through branches, no small animal movements. My boots crunched through frost that shouldn't exist at this elevation and temperature. Each breath created fog clouds that lingered longer than physics allowed, forming shapes that looked almost like grasping fingers before dissipating. The trail markers I'd memorized over 8 years of ranger service were no longer where they should be. Either I was completely lost, impossible given my GPS experience, or the geography itself was being altered by something that operated outside normal spatial relationships. 9:22 p.m. I found Rachel Thompson's campsite. It was exactly where my malfunctioning GPS had directed me, in a clearing that didn't appear on any official park map. Her tent was perfectly intact, sleeping bag still arranged as if she'd just stepped out momentarily. A camp stove held a pot of water that was somehow still steaming despite obviously being abandoned for hours. But the campsite existed in a sphere of impossible physics. Frost covered every surface except for a perfect circle approximately 10 feet in diameter around the tent. Within that circle, the temperature felt tropical. Outside it, my breath fogged instantly. Rachel's journal lay open beside her sleeping bag. The final entry, dated yesterday, read, "The dreams are getting stronger. I can see him now, tall, ancient, beautiful in a way that makes my soul ache. He speaks in Cherokee, but I understand everything. He says I'm going to help him hunt, that my appearance will draw others who taste sweeter than I do. I should be terrified, but I feel honored. Chosen. Tomorrow I become something more than human." My hands trembled so violently I almost dropped the journal. Rachel Thompson hadn't been taken. She'd been converted. The entity had transformed her into a lure, using her appearance to manifest simultaneously in multiple locations, drawing potential victims toward its hunting ground. A branch snapped behind me. I spun around, hand instinctively moving toward my service weapon. A figure stood at the edge of the firelight, a tall man with features that seemed to shift between Native American and something far older. His eyes held the depth of geological time, and when he smiled, his teeth were the translucent white of ancient bone. "Tyler Brooks," he spoke in accented English that sounded like wind through stone. "You've been learning about my hunting methods." My throat constricted like someone was slowly strangling me. Where is Rachel Thompson? She is everywhere and nowhere. Part of me now helping me feed. His form flickered like heat distortion, sometimes appearing solid, sometimes translucent. "You interest me, Tyler. Most humans cannot perceive the contradictions in reality that my presence creates, but you see the impossibilities, don't you? What are you?" "I am hunger given consciousness. I am the space between heartbeats where life becomes death. Your people would call me vampire, but that word carries assumptions about rules and limitations. I am older than your concepts of existence itself." The temperature plummeted until my exhalations came out as ice crystals. The entity stepped closer, and I could see that his shadow fell in multiple directions simultaneously, as if cast by suns that existed in parallel dimensions. Rachel researched my kind. She learned that we exist in the spaces between your reality's rigid structure. Linear time, singular location, consistent physical form. These are conveniences your species created to make existence manageable. But reality is far more flexible. My vision started fragmenting, showing me multiple versions of the clearing simultaneously. In one, the entity appeared as Rachel Thompson. In another, he was a massive dark shape with too many limbs. In a third, he was simply an absence, a hole in existence where something should be but wasn't. You're making me see what you really are. I'm showing you what reality actually is beneath the illusion of consistency your mind constructs. His voice came from multiple directions at once. The question is, can your consciousness survive the revelation? Or will you shatter like glass against infinite truth? I thought about Emma asking why stars were so far away, about Sarah's hand in mine during Emma's birth, about the countless visitors I'd guided safely through these mountains. Human connection, love, responsibility. These weren't just emotions, they were anchor points in reality's structure. I choose to remain human. The entity laughed, a sound like avalanches in distant dimensions. Choice. Your species' most cherished illusion. You think you can simply decide to resist cosmic truth? I am entropy given consciousness, Tyler. I am the heat death of universes made manifest. What can human love possibly accomplish against? Something shifted inside my chest, not physical, but fundamental. The love I felt for my family wasn't just emotion. It was a force that insisted on meaning, on hope, on the validity of finite human experience against infinite darkness. That love became a weapon. Light erupted from my hands. Not electric light, but something warmer, more fundamental. The light of consciousness that refuses to be extinguished, of love that transcends physical law, of human will that insists on mattering despite cosmic insignificance. The entity shrieked and staggered backward. Where my light touched him, his form became more solid, more bound by the physical laws he'd been circumventing. "Impossible," he hissed. "You're just human. Just meat with delusions of significance." "I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm someone who helps people find their way home." The light intensified, "And you're going to return Rachel Thompson's soul, or I'm going to bind you so tightly to this dimension that you'll experience every single day of linear time until the sun burns out." For a moment that lasted either seconds or centuries, we stood locked in cosmic struggle. Ancient hunger versus human love. Infinite entropy versus finite meaning. The clearing around us flickered between multiple realities as the entity's control over dimensional space began failing. Finally, he spoke. "She chose this willingly. I cannot undo what she freely accepted. Then you'll face me instead." "No." His form began dissipating. "You have made yourself unpalatable. Love makes flesh bitter. Hope creates indigestion for beings like me. You have contaminated yourself with meaning. If I ever see you hunting in my park again, you won't." The entity was fading. "But others of my kind exist in the spaces between stars, Tyler Brooks, and now they know that humans can develop defenses they never expected. You have changed the rules of an ancient game." He vanished, leaving behind only the scent of ozone and the lingering taste of infinity on my tongue. I stood alone in Rachel Thompson's impossible campsite, surrounded by evidence of cosmic horror that would never appear in any official report. My radio crackled with normal dispatches about routine park business, my GPS resumed showing accurate coordinates, and the temperature returned to seasonally appropriate ranges. Rachel's journal had changed. The final entry now read, "I'm sorry. I thought I wanted to become something more than human, but I was wrong. Humanity isn't about limitations, it's about love that transcends limitations. Tell my family I chose to come back." I found her body the next morning, peaceful and unmarked, lying in her sleeping bag as if she'd simply gone to sleep and chosen not to wake up. The official cause of death was hypothermia, though her body temperature was normal. Some mysteries don't require solutions, only respectful silence. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying Ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Rachel Thompson. I read every single one. 3 weeks later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a photograph of me standing in that impossible clearing, but the image showed something my eyes hadn't perceived at the time. Behind me, barely visible in the shadows, dozens of other figures watched, entities from the spaces between stars, beings that existed in the margins of reality. The photograph's back bore a single line written in Cherokee syllabary, which I had translated, "The game evolves." I keep the photograph in my evidence locker at the ranger station, filed under Unexplained Phenomena. My colleagues still call me the Professor, but now there's a different tone to their voices. Respect mixed with something that might be fear. Because sometimes late at night when I'm filing incident reports, they'll find me staring into the darkness beyond our station's windows, watching for movement that doesn't obey the rules of physics. They've started asking me to investigate their weird cases with a seriousness that acknowledges we exist in a universe far stranger and more dangerous than any of us want to admit. And sometimes when Emma asks why I'm quiet at dinner, I tell her about the importance of love, how it's the one force in the universe that can stand against infinite darkness and infinite hunger. She doesn't understand yet, but someday she might need to. Because the game evolves and we're still playing whether we know it or not. My name is Tyler Brooks, and I learned that the universe is vast, ancient, and hungry. But I also learned that love is a light that burns in dimensions those cosmic entities can't even perceive. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough to save us all. End. Author's note. This story is dedicated to all the park rangers who venture into wild places where reality grows thin, and to the families whose love calls them safely home from encounters with the impossible. My name is Blake Anderson, and at 6:47 a.m. my radio crackled with the call that would change my life. Unit 47, we have a code yellow in Sector 12 of the Smokies. Missing person reported, Emma Richardson, age 22, last seen yesterday evening at Cataract Falls Trailhead. Family's frantic. You copy? I grabbed my coffee mug from the ranger station desk, the ceramic still warm against my palm as I keyed the radio. 23 years working these mountains, and missing hikers were just part of the job. People got turned around, took wrong trails, ran out of water. Nothing I hadn't handled 100 times before. Copy that, dispatch. Blake Anderson responding. ETA to trailhead 15 minutes. 10-4, Unit 47. Family's driving up from Gatlinburg now. Father's name is David Richardson. Says his daughter's an experienced hiker, had GPS, emergency beacon, the works. I drained the coffee and pulled on my duty jacket, feeling the familiar weight of my gear settle across my shoulders. Motorola APX radio clipped to my left shoulder, Garmin GPS on my belt, first aid kit, emergency shelter, water purification tablets, 500 lumens LED flashlight, backup batteries. My Springfield XD40 rode in its holster. You never knew what kind of wildlife you'd encounter in these remote areas, though in my experience, the two-legged variety usually caused more problems than bears. The drive to Cataract Falls took me along Highway 441, past the morning mist rising from the valleys like ghostly fingers. October in the Smokies meant the tourist crowds had thinned, but the weather could turn nasty without warning. I checked my phone. Weather app showed clear skies today, high of 67, but a storm system moving in tomorrow night. The Richardson family was waiting in the parking lot when I arrived. A middle-aged man pacing beside a blue Honda Pilot, a woman sitting on the tailgate clutching a thermos. The father looked up when my Ranger vehicle pulled in, hope and desperation warring on his face. Mr. Richardson? I'm Ranger Blake Anderson. I extended my hand, noting his firm grip, the calluses of a working man. Tell me about Emma. She's not reckless, he said immediately, like he'd been practicing the words. 22 years old, studying environmental science at UT. She's hiked these trails since she was 12. Always checks in every few hours, always follows her planned route. Mrs. Richardson looked up from her thermos, eyes red-rimmed. She was supposed to call last night by 7. When we didn't hear from her by 9, we drove up to the trailhead. Found her car still here, but... Her voice cracked. I pulled out my incident report notebook, flipping to a fresh page. What time did she start hiking yesterday? Around noon, David said. She wanted to photograph the waterfalls for a school project. Had her good camera, tripod, the works. Said she'd hike to Cataract Falls, then maybe push on to Ramsey Cascades if she felt good. That was a decent hike. About 8 miles round trip to Cataract Falls, closer to 15 if she went all the way to Ramsey Cascades. Doable for an experienced hiker, but plenty of places to get turned around, especially if she left the marked trail chasing the perfect photo. What was she wearing? What gear did she have? Blue Columbia hiking jacket, gray pants, red hiking boots, full pack, water, snacks, first aid kit, headlamp, space blanket, her phone, GPS watch, and that emergency beacon we made her buy. He pulled out his iPhone, showing me a photo. This was her yesterday morning before she left. Emma Richardson smiled at the camera, blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, holding a travel mug and giving a thumbs up. Pretty girl, looked capable and confident. The kind who thought she was invincible because she'd never run into real trouble before. Any medical conditions, medications, anything that might affect her judgment or physical capability? Nothing. She's in better shape than kids half her age, Mrs. Richardson said, attempting a smile. Runs marathons, rock climbs, kayaks. That's why this doesn't make sense. I nodded, making notes. I'm going to hike her intended route, see what I can find. My radio's got good range through most of the park, but there are dead zones in some of the hollows. If I'm not back by dark, don't worry. Sometimes these searches take time. What I didn't tell them was that 24 hours was critical. After that, statistics got ugly fast, especially with a storm coming. But Emma Richardson was young, prepared, and experienced. I'd probably find her with a twisted ankle or dead phone battery, maybe a little embarrassed, but otherwise fine. The trailhead kiosk showed a hand-drawn map of the area, updated weekly by park staff. I studied it while adjusting my pack straps, noting the elevation changes, stream crossings, and trail junctions. The path to Cataract Falls was well marked, but several unofficial trails branched off. Old logging roads, game trails, and remnants of paths used by mountain families before the park was established. I started up the trail at a steady pace, boots finding sure footing on the packed earth and exposed roots. The morning air carried the crisp smell of autumn leaves, underlaid with the green scent of moss and running water. My radio crackled occasionally with routine traffic from other rangers, but I kept my attention focused on the trail ahead, watching for any sign of Emma's passage. About 2 miles in, I found the first trace, a footprint in soft mud beside Porter Creek, size 8 hiking boot with a distinctive tread pattern that matched the boots Emma's parents had described. The print pointed uphill toward Cataract Falls, confirming she'd made it this far on her planned route. I keyed my radio. Unit 47 to dispatch. Go ahead, Unit 47. I've got sign at mile marker 2.1 on the Cataract Falls trail. Subject definitely came this way yesterday. Continuing search. Copy, Unit 47. Keep us posted. The trail climbed steadily through mixed hardwood forest, past massive tulip poplars and ancient hemlocks. Normally I'd appreciate the cathedral quiet of these old-growth sections, but today I found myself listening for sounds that didn't belong. Calls for help, equipment rattling, anything that might lead me to Emma Richardson. At 3 miles, the trail forked. The main path continued straight toward Cataract Falls, while a fainter trail branched left toward an area marked on older maps as Settlement Hollow. Most hikers stuck to the main trail, but photographers sometimes took the side path looking for more isolated shots. I studied the ground at the junction. The soft earth showed multiple footprints, some from Emma's distinctive boot tread, but also several others. Hiking boots, work boots, what looked like bare feet. That was odd. Most of the foot traffic through here was day hikers in proper gear. Following the side trail, I found more of Emma's prints mixed with the others. The path descended into a narrow hollow where the trees grew thicker and the air felt noticeably cooler. My GPS showed I was heading roughly northwest, toward an area that wasn't on the current park maps. The wrongness hit me about 50 yards down the side trail. Not wrongness like danger. I'd been in enough genuinely dangerous situations to recognize that particular feeling. This was different. Subtle, like walking into a house where someone had rearranged all the furniture while you were gone. Everything looked normal, but the proportions felt off. The trees seemed too close together, creating shadows that fell at angles that didn't match the sun's position. The usual sounds of the forest, bird calls, insect chatter, wind through leaves, had faded to an unnatural quiet. Even my footsteps seemed muffled, as if the forest itself was absorbing sound. I stopped and pulled out my GPS unit, checking my coordinates against the topographic map loaded in its memory. According to the device, I was still on marked park land, following a legitimate trail toward an area designated as Historical Interest, Settlement Ruins. But the trail I was walking didn't appear on any of my maps, official or otherwise. My radio crackled with static. Unit 47, what's your status? I keyed the transmitter. Unit 47 here. I'm following tracks on an unmarked trail in Settlement Hollow. Signal strength, okay? Static answered me. I tried again, but got only electronic noise in response. Dead zones weren't uncommon in the hollows, but this felt different. The static had an almost organic quality, like whispered voices just below the threshold of understanding. The trail curved ahead, and I caught a glimpse of structures through the trees. Not the typical stone foundations and collapsed chimneys you'd expect from abandoned mountain settlements, but actual buildings. Intact buildings. I approached cautiously, one hand instinctively checking my sidearm. A small cluster of wooden structures sat in a cleared area ahead, maybe a dozen buildings arranged around what might have been a town square. They looked old but well maintained, with fresh paint on some of the shutters and smoke rising from several chimneys, but that was impossible. There were no active settlements in this part of the park. The last mountain families had been relocated when the Smokies were established in the 1930s. I'd hiked every trail in this sector multiple times over the years, and I'd never seen this place before. I pulled out my phone to document what I was seeing, but the screen showed no service, despite being in an area where I usually had at least 2 bars. The camera function still worked, so I took several photos of the buildings and the trail leading to them. Movement caught my eye. A figure in a blue jacket walking between 2 of the buildings. Emma Richardson, or someone wearing the same Columbia jacket her parents had described. "Emma," I called out, my voice echoing strangely in the clearing. "Emma Richardson." The figure stopped and turned toward me. Even at this distance, I could see it was a young woman with blonde hair. She raised her hand in what might have been a wave, then disappeared behind one of the buildings. I jogged toward the settlement, my pack bouncing against my back. As I got closer, details became clearer. The buildings were old, 1800s construction with hand-hewn logs and stone foundations, but they showed none of the weathering you'd expect from structures exposed to mountain weather for over a century. Paint looked fresh. Windows were intact and clean. Gardens beside several houses showed recently tended vegetables. The woman in the blue jacket emerged from behind a house on the far side of the square. She stood perfectly still, watching me approach. Something about her posture seemed wrong, too rigid, like she was standing at attention. "Emma, are you all right?" I called as I entered the square. "Your parents are worried sick." She didn't respond, didn't move. Just stood there staring at me with an expression I couldn't read at this distance. Other figures began emerging from the buildings. Men, women, children, all dressed in clothing that looked like it belonged in a historical reenactment. Long dresses on the women, suspenders and work shirts on the men, simple clothes on the children. They moved with the same rigid quality as the woman in the blue jacket, taking positions around the perimeter of the square. My breathing became shallow and rapid, like I couldn't pull enough oxygen from the air. These people, if that's what they were, moved wrong. Too coordinated, too synchronized, like they were responding to signals I couldn't hear. I reached for my radio, but my hands had gone numb and wouldn't obey simple commands. The transmitter felt foreign in my grip, like I'd forgotten how to operate a device I'd used thousands of times. "Hello," called one of the men, his voice carrying clearly across the square despite the distance. "Welcome to Whitmore Hollow. We've been expecting you." The wrongness crystallized into something my training finally recognized. Threat assessment, situation awareness, exit strategy. My hand moved automatically to my sidearm, but my fingers trembled as they found the grip. "I'm looking for Emma Richardson," I managed to say, surprised at how normal my voice sounded. "Young woman, blue jacket, hiking alone yesterday." "Oh yes," the man said, walking toward me with that same unnaturally rigid gait. "Emma's here. She's become part of our community, just like you will." The other figures began closing in, moving in perfect synchronization. Their faces became clearer as they approached, pale, with dark circles under their eyes, and expressions that didn't quite match the emotions they should have been showing. Smiles that didn't reach the eyes, concerned frowns that looked painted on. The woman in the blue jacket hadn't moved from her position across the square. Now I could see her face clearly, and bile rose in my throat with a metallic taste that coated my tongue. It was Emma Richardson, but something fundamental was wrong with her. Her skin had a waxy, translucent quality, and her eyes reflected light like an animal's. Suor frio escorreu pelo pescoço mesmo no ar gelado da manhã. My vision narrowed to a tunnel focused on Emma's face, peripheral awareness vanishing completely. The approaching figures seemed to shimmer at the edges of my sight, becoming less distinct the closer they got. "Emma, we need to leave," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Your parents are looking for you." She tilted her head at an angle that was just slightly too far to the right. When she spoke, her voice carried the same unnatural clarity as the man's. "I can't leave, Blake. None of us can leave. But that's okay. You'll understand once you join us." How did she know my name? I hadn't introduced myself. The circle of figures tightened. Up close, I could see that their clothes, while period-appropriate, showed signs of age and wear that suggested they'd been wearing them for a very long time. Decades, maybe longer. Fabric faded and mended repeatedly, leather cracked and stained, metal buttons green with verdigris. Músculos do pescoço enrijeceram como cabos de aço esticados as the implications sank in. These weren't reenactors or mountain hermits. These were people who had been here much longer than should have been possible. People who should have been dead. The man who had first spoken was close enough now that I could smell him. Not the normal sense of someone living rough in the mountains, but something else. Something like old flowers and stagnant water, with an underlying sweetness that reminded me of meat beginning to turn. "Don't be afraid, Ranger Anderson," he said, and his breath carried the same sweet, rotten smell. "Death isn't the end here in Whitmore Hollow. We've found a way to continue, to build our community even after our physical forms passed on. Emma understands now. Soon you will too." My hand finally found my service weapon, muscle memory overriding the numbness in my fingers. The Springfield cleared its holster smoothly, safety disengaging with a familiar click. But as I brought the weapon to bear, the approaching figures didn't react with fear or surprise. They just kept walking toward me with those painted-on expressions. "Firearms won't help you here," the man said, still smiling that wrong smile. "We're beyond such earthly concerns." I fired anyway. The .40 caliber round caught him center mass at close range, the impact driving him backward several steps. The sound of the gunshot echoed off the buildings with unnatural resonance, like the report was being amplified and distorted by the structures themselves. The man looked down at the spreading dark stain on his shirt, then back up at me with an expression of mild curiosity. No pain, no shock, just interest, like he was examining an unusual insect. "Interesting," he said, pressing his hand to the wound. When he pulled it away, his palm was covered with something that wasn't quite blood, too dark, too thick, with an oily sheen that reflected light strangely. It's been many years since anyone tried that. The other figures hadn't even paused. They continued their advance, faces showing the same mild interest. Emma Richardson took her first steps toward me, and I could see that her hiking boots left dark stains on the ground with each step. Punhos fecharam sozinhos, unhas cavando marcas nas palmas, while my mind struggled to process what I was seeing. The rational part of my brain, the part trained to assess situations and respond appropriately, kept insisting that there had to be a logical explanation. Drug-addled squatters, elaborate hoax, some kind of psychological breakdown on my part. But the evidence of my senses was overwhelming. These people were dead, had been dead for a very long time, and somehow impossibly they were still walking around, still talking, still maintaining their little community in a place that shouldn't exist. I backed toward the edge of the square, sweeping my weapon in an arc to cover the approaching figures. "Stay back! I'm warning you!" They ignored the gun completely. Why shouldn't they? What threat was a bullet to someone who was already dead? Emma was close enough now that I could see the details of what had happened to her. Her skin had the gray-white pallor of a corpse, with dark veins visible beneath the surface. Her eyes had clouded over, but somehow she could still see. When she smiled, her teeth were stained dark, and something that wasn't saliva dripped from the corners of her mouth. "It doesn't hurt, Blake," she said, her voice carrying that same unnatural clarity despite her obvious physical condition. "The transition is actually quite peaceful. You just have to stop fighting it." "What did you do to her?" I demanded, still backing away but running out of space as more figures emerged from the buildings behind me. "We welcomed her," said an elderly woman in a faded calico dress, "just as we welcomed all the others who found their way to us over the years. Just as we'll welcome you." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Musculos das pernas tremeram como se fossem desligar as I realized what I was hearing. This wasn't just about Emma Richardson. This was about every missing person who had vanished in this section of the Smokies over the decades. Every unexplained disappearance, every case that had gone cold, every family left wondering what had happened to their loved one. They were all here, all part of this impossible community of the dead. How many? I whispered, the words escaping before I could stop them. Oh, quite a few by now, the man with the gunshot wound said cheerfully. We've been growing slowly but steadily since the sickness took the original residents back in 1892. Every few years, someone finds their way to us, usually hikers, like Emma, sometimes hunters or researchers. Once we had a whole family, got lost in a blizzard and followed our lights to safety. 1892. That was more than 125 years ago. Whatever had happened here, it had been going on for over a century, an entire phantom town appearing and disappearing in the mountains, collecting victims to maintain its population of the dead. I was completely surrounded now, maybe 30 figures in total, all watching me with those dead, reflective eyes. Men, women, children, all wearing clothes from different time periods. Emma's modern hiking gear stood out starkly among the period clothing of the others. Músculos da mandíbula travaram com tanta força que ouvi meus dentes rangendo as fight-or-flight reflexes warred with rational thought. These things, whatever they were, moved slowly and didn't seem to pose an immediate physical threat. But they also seemed impossible to stop with conventional weapons. What do you want? I asked, still covering them with my sidearm even though I knew it was useless. Only what we've always wanted, said the elderly woman. To continue, to maintain our community, to welcome new neighbors who can help us grow and thrive. By killing them? By offering them eternal life, corrected the man. Death is just a transition here. The sickness that took us taught us that the boundary between life and death is more fluid than most people realize. We've learned to exist in the spaces between. Emma stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the sweet corruption emanating from her body. It's not like being alive, she said, but it's not like being dead either. It's different, peaceful. You don't feel pain or fear or loneliness anymore. You just feel connected to everyone else here. And you can't leave. Why would we want to? Asked a young man who looked like he might have been a Union soldier based on his uniform. This is home. This is family. This is forever. The circle tightened another step. I could feel cold air emanating from their bodies like walking into a meat locker. My breath began to fog despite the relatively warm October morning. Pensamentos ficaram fragmentados como estática de rádio, as options raced through my mind. Running seemed impossible. They had me surrounded, and even if I broke through their line, where would I run to? The trail I'd followed here hadn't existed on any map. For all I knew, it would disappear the moment I tried to retrace my steps. Fighting was pointless. My service weapon had proven useless, and I wasn't carrying anything else that might work against the supernatural, which left negotiation. Not exactly covered in ranger training, but I had to try something. What if I don't want to join your community? I asked. What if I just want to leave and forget I was ever here? The figures exchanged glances, their synchronized movement creating an unnerving wave effect as heads turned in perfect unison. I'm afraid that's not possible, said the man with the gunshot wound. You've seen us now. You know we exist. That knowledge changes you, makes you part of this place whether you want to be or not. Besides, added Emma, you wouldn't want to leave us, Blake. You have such a strong sense of duty, such dedication to helping people. How could you abandon all these lost souls who need your protection? The words hit home with devastating accuracy. She was right. Even if these things were dead, even if they were somehow responsible for decades of disappearances, they had once been human beings. People with families, dreams, fears, people who deserved better than this twilight existence. But Emma Richardson had been alive less than 24 hours ago. There had to be a way to reverse what had been done to her, to save her before it was too late. How long does the transition take? I asked. For most people, just a few hours, said the elderly woman. The sickness works quickly once it takes hold. Emma was already showing signs when she arrived yesterday evening. But I could still save her, if I got her out of here to a hospital. No. Emma's voice cut through my words with sudden sharpness. I don't want to be saved, Blake. I want to stay here with my new family. The thing wearing Emma Richardson's face smiled at me, and I saw that her teeth were no longer stained dark. They were gone entirely, replaced by something that looked like broken glass. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Blake Anderson's situation? Comment below. Bill subiu na garganta, com gosto metálico as the full horror of what I was seeing sank in. This wasn't Emma Richardson anymore. Whatever process these things use to welcome new community members, it didn't just kill the body. It corrupted it, changed it into something that only resembled the original person. What happened to the real Emma? I whispered. I am the real Emma, the thing insisted. I'm just improved, enhanced, made perfect for this place. The man stepped forward, his gunshot wound now completely healed, leaving only a dark stain on his shirt, as evidence it had ever existed. The transition can be difficult to watch, Ranger Anderson. That's why we usually prefer people to join us voluntarily. It's less traumatic for everyone involved. And if they don't volunteer? Well, he said, spreading his hands in a gesture that might have been apologetic, sometimes we have to be more persuasive. The figures began moving again, closing the final distance between us. I fired 3 more rounds, aiming for center mass on the closest targets. The bullets struck home with wet, meaty sounds, but the impacts barely slowed their advance. Dark, oily fluid leaked from the wounds, but the figures showed no signs of pain or distress. Suor gelado formosi instantaneamente na testa, as I realized how completely outmatched I was. These things were beyond human understanding, beyond conventional weapons, beyond any training or experience I'd accumulated in over 2 decades of law enforcement and emergency response work. A child, she couldn't have been more than 8 years old when she died, reached out with hands that were gray and mottled like week-old meat. Don't be scared, mister. It only hurts for a little while. I jerked away from her touch, but stumbled over something behind me. Another figure had moved into position, an older man in overalls whose entire left side looked like it had been crushed by something heavy. He steadied me with hands that felt like ice through my jacket. Easy there, he said in a voice that sounded like wind through dead leaves. No need to hurt yourself, we'll take good care of you. More hands grabbed me from all sides. Cold, dead fingers that should not have been able to support their own weight, much less restrain a living person. But they held me firm as something sharp pricked the side of my neck. The woman in calico smiled as she withdrew what looked like a sewing needle from my throat. The tip was stained with the same dark, oily substance that leaked from their wounds. The sickness, she explained conversationally. It spreads easily once you know how to cultivate it. You'll start feeling the changes within the hour. Musculos das coxas tremiram incontrolavelmente as whatever she'd injected began to spread through my system. It felt like ice water flowing through my veins, carrying numbness and a strange sense of disconnection from my body. Fight it, Blake! The voice came from somewhere behind the crowd of figures. A new voice, one that didn't have the weird resonance of the others. Human. Alive. The figures turned toward the sound, their synchronized movement creating gaps in their formation. Through one of the gaps, I caught a glimpse of someone running between the buildings, a young woman in hiking gear, but not Emma Richardson. This woman had dark hair and was moving with the quick, panicked energy of someone very much alive. Another visitor, said the man with the gunshot wound, sounding pleased. How wonderful. It's been years since we had 2 arrivals so close together. The woman broke cover, sprinting across the square toward us. She was carrying something in her hands, not a weapon, but what looked like an old leather book. Let him go, she shouted, skidding to a halt just outside the circle of figures. I know what you are, and I know how to stop you. The elderly woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Do you, child? Do you really understand what we've become? You're plague spirits, the newcomer said, holding up the book. Victims of the 1892 cholera outbreak that wiped out Whitmore Hollow. But instead of passing on, you bound yourselves to this place using corrupted folk magic. You've been trapped here ever since, unable to truly live or truly die. The figures had gone completely still, their painted-on expressions flickering for the first time since I'd encountered them. "And you think that old book can banish us?" asked the man, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "Not banish. Free." The woman opened the book, revealing pages covered in handwritten text and crude diagrams. "This is the journal of Jeremiah Whitmore, the folk healer who tried to save this town during the epidemic. He documented everything, the progression of the disease, the desperate measures he took to try to contain it, and the ritual he performed as a last resort when traditional medicine failed. A ritual. That explained how an entire town could exist in a state between life and death for over a century. Some kind of supernatural intervention, probably well-intentioned but horribly corrupted by desperation and grief. "The binding is weakening," the woman continued, flipping through pages. "That's why you've been appearing more frequently, why you're able to take victims from farther away, but it's also why you can be freed." "We don't want to be freed," hissed the child with the gray hands. "We want to stay together. We want to be a family." "You're not a family," the woman said firmly. "You're prisoners, victims of a tragedy that should have ended 125 years ago. Jeremiah Whitmore thought he was saving you, but all he did was trap you in an endless cycle of hunger and loneliness." The injection site on my neck burned like a brand, and I could feel something spreading through my bloodstream. Dark tendrils of corruption that made my vision flicker between normal color and a strange sepia tone, like looking at an old photograph. "Read it," I managed to say through lips that were already going numb. "Whatever you're going to do it fast." The woman, I still didn't know her name, began reading from the journal in a clear, strong voice. The words were in English, but they had an archaic cadence that suggested they'd been written by someone educated in classical rhetoric. "By the grace of God and the power invested in the natural order, I call upon the spirits of earth and air, fire and water, to release these souls from their earthly prison. Let that which was bound be unbound. Let that which was trapped be freed. Let that which was twisted be made straight." The effect was immediate and dramatic. The figures surrounding me began to shimmer and fade, like mirages in desert heat. Their expressions changed from the painted-on emotions they'd been wearing to something more genuine: confusion, fear, and what might have been relief. "What's happening to us?" whispered Emma, and for the first time since I'd seen her in the square, she sounded like herself. Scared and confused, but recognizably human. "You're being given the choice you should have had 125 years ago," the woman said, still reading from the journal. "The choice to move on, to find peace, to let go of the pain and fear that's kept you trapped here." The cold grip of dead hands released me as the figures became increasingly translucent. The burning sensation in my neck began to fade, replaced by normal warmth returning to my extremities. Some of the spirits were already beginning to dissolve completely, their forms becoming wisps of light that drifted upward like fireflies. Others seemed to be fighting the process, clinging to their physical manifestations with desperate determination. "I don't want to go," Emma said, tears streaming down her translucent cheeks. "I'm scared. What if there's nothing after this? What if this is all there is?" The man with the gunshot wound was also crying, his imposing presence reduced to that of a frightened human being facing the unknown. "We've been here so long," he said. "This place is all we remember, all we are." "That's the corruption talking," the woman said gently, closing the journal. "Jeremiah Whitmore was a good man, but he let his fear and grief cloud his judgment. He bound you to your pain instead of helping you transcend it. What waits beyond this place isn't nothing. It's everything. It's peace and healing, and reunion with everyone you've ever loved." One by one, the spirits began to let go. The elderly woman was first, her form dissolving into golden light that rose toward the sky like a released balloon. Others followed. The child with gray hands, the Civil War soldier, dozens of figures I hadn't noticed before emerging from the buildings as the binding weakened. Emma was one of the last to go. She looked at me with eyes that were fully human again, blue and clear and alive with genuine emotion. "Tell my parents I'm sorry," she said. "Tell them I love them, and that I'm not afraid anymore. I will, I promised, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. She smiled, a real smile this time, full of warmth and gratitude, and then she was gone, her light joining the stream of souls rising into the October sky. The man with the gunshot wound was the very last. He stood alone in the center of the square, looking around at the empty buildings with an expression of profound sadness. 125 years, he said. 125 years of this half-existence, driven by hunger we could never satisfy and loneliness we could never fill. How do you forgive yourself for that kind of time? You don't, the woman said simply. You accept it, learn from it, and choose to do better. That's all any of us can do. He nodded slowly, then looked at me. Thank you, Ranger Anderson, for trying to help Emma, even when you didn't understand what you were facing. That kind of courage, that's what kept us human, even when everything else was taken away. His form began to shimmer and fade. Tell people what you saw here. Tell them that love is stronger than death, but also that grief can become a prison if you're not careful. Tell them to let go when it's time to let go. And then he was gone, and the woman and I were alone in a square that was rapidly becoming less solid, less real. The buildings around us flickered like badly tuned television reception, their edges becoming soft and indistinct. We need to leave, she said urgently. The whole pocket dimension is collapsing now that the binding's been broken. If we don't get out before it disappears completely, we could be trapped in the void between spaces. She grabbed my hand and pulled me toward what I hoped was the trail back to the main path. The ground beneath our feet felt spongy and unreliable, like walking on foam rubber. The trees around us blurred together into an impressionistic smear of brown and green. I tried to ask who she was, how she'd known to come here, what the hell we'd just witnessed, but my voice wouldn't work properly. The injection was still affecting my system, leaving me disconnected and disoriented, even though the worst of it seemed to be passing. We ran through a forest that was becoming less and less real with each step. Trees that had been solid became transparent. The path under our feet faded in and out like a weak radio signal. The sky above flickered between autumn blue and absolute darkness. And then suddenly we were back on a trail I recognized, the official Cataract Falls Trail, marked with standard Park Service signs and bounded by familiar landmarks. The woman released my hand and bent over, breathing heavily. That, she gasped, was way too close. I managed to find my voice again. Who are you? How did you know about that place? She straightened up, pushing dark hair out of her face. Dr. Sarah Chen, paranormal researcher from Duke University. I've been tracking supernatural incidents in national parks for my dissertation. When I heard about Emma Richardson's disappearance and cross-referenced it with other missing persons cases in this area, I recognized the pattern. You've seen this before? Not exactly like this, but similar phenomena. Places where traumatic events created, let's call them echoes in the fabric of reality. Usually they fade over time, but occasionally they stabilize and become self-sustaining. This was one of the most powerful examples I've ever encountered. I looked back down the trail we'd just emerged from, but there was no sign of the path that had led us to Whitmore Hollow. Just normal forest looking exactly like every other section of the Smokies I'd hiked over the years. Is it really gone? The physical manifestation is gone, she said, checking her watch. But the spirits are free now. They can move on to whatever comes next instead of being trapped in an endless loop of hunger and loneliness. My radio crackled to life, making both of us jump. Unit 47, what's your status? You've been radio silent for over 3 hours. 3 hours? It had felt like maybe 30 minutes since I'd entered the square. But my watch confirmed what the dispatcher was saying. It was past noon, and I'd been missing since mid-morning. Unit 47 here, I said into the radio. I'm okay. Found the missing hiker. Is she all right? Do you need medical assistance? I looked at Dr. Chen, who shook her head slightly. There was no way to explain what had really happened without sounding completely insane. Negative on medical assistance, I said, but I need to speak with the Richardson family as soon as possible. The hardest part was facing Emma's parents. How do you tell someone that their daughter is dead, but also that she's finally at peace? How do you explain that she'd been caught in something beyond human understanding, but that she'd been freed from it? In the end, I told them the truth, as much of it as they could handle. Emma had encountered something in the woods, I didn't specify what, and she hadn't survived. But her last words had been about how much she loved them, and she hadn't been afraid at the end. Dr. Chen backed up my story with carefully edited scientific language about atmospheric anomalies and localized reality distortions. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough truth to give the Richardsons some measure of closure. The official report listed Emma Richardson as a victim of accidental death due to exposure and hypothermia. Her body was never found, which wasn't unusual in the Smokies. The mountains kept their secrets, and sometimes people just vanished into the wilderness, but I knew better. Emma Richardson had found something much stranger than a hiking accident, and in the end, she'd found her way home. Dr. Chen gave me her card before she left. "If you ever encounter anything else like this," she said, "call me. There are more places like Whitmore Hollow out there, and most of them don't have anyone watching over them." I kept the card, though I hoped I'd never need to use it. But as I drove back to the ranger station that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Smokies were old mountains, full of forgotten places and buried tragedies. And if one community of spirits had found a way to exist between life and death, there might be others. The mountains kept their secrets. But now I knew that sometimes those secrets were desperate to be heard. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Emma Richardson. I read every single one. My name is Mike Carter, and Sarah Williams was investigating local legends about an abandoned theater when she disappeared, as if the very legend had taken its revenge. 23 years as a ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains, and I'd never lost anyone. Never. That perfect record was about to shatter like glass against something that shouldn't exist. Something that had been waiting in those ruins for almost a century to complete its final, terrible performance. The morning started like any other Tuesday in October 2018. I was sitting at our kitchen table in Gatlinburg, sharing coffee with Linda, while she reviewed her nursing schedule at LeConte Medical Center. Emma was practicing violin in the living room, some piece by Bach that made the house feel alive with music, while 8-year-old Sophie sat beside me, meticulously coloring a horse in her sketchbook with purple crayons. "Daddy, do horses come in purple?" Sophie asked, not looking up from her artwork. "In your world, sweetheart, horses can be any color you want," I replied, ruffling her honey-colored hair. Linda smiled at me over her coffee mug, the same smile that had convinced me to marry her 15 years ago. These quiet moments before my shift started were sacred to me, my family safe and sound, everything in its proper place. At exactly 6:47 a.m., my radio crackled to life. "Unit 23, this is dispatch. We have a missing person report. Cataract Falls Trail area. 24-year-old female graduate student from University of Tennessee. Last seen yesterday evening around 1800 hours." I kissed Linda goodbye, tasting the hint of vanilla creamer on her lips. "I'll be home for dinner at 7, I promised. Emma's got that violin recital tonight, right?" 7:30 at the school, Linda confirmed. "Don't be late. She's been practicing for weeks." I grabbed my gear bag from the mudroom, GPS unit, emergency medical kit, rope, water, energy bars, extra batteries, and my service weapon. Standard search and rescue loadout that I could pack in my sleep. As I walked to my Ranger vehicle, Sophie called from the front door. "Bring home someone good, Daddy." It was her little joke. She always said that instead of "be safe," because she claimed I was always bringing home lost hikers. The drive to Cataract Falls took 40 minutes through winding mountain roads painted with autumn colors. I'd driven this route hundreds of times, could navigate it blindfolded. But something felt different this morning. The trees seemed to lean closer to the road, and the shadows between them appeared deeper than usual, as if they were hiding secrets I wasn't meant to discover. Dispatch had forwarded me the initial report during the drive, Sarah Williams, 24, PhD candidate in theater and performance studies at UT. Her roommate, Jessica Chen, had called campus police when Sarah didn't return from what she described as a research expedition to investigate local folklore about abandoned theaters in the Appalachian region. Jessica provided Sarah's last known GPS coordinates and mentioned that Sarah had been obsessed with finding some theater that local historians claimed never existed. Sarah's silver Honda Civic sat alone in the Cataract Falls parking area, morning dew still beating on the windshield. Tennessee license plate 471 BXM. I ran the plates through my MDT, registration current, no outstanding warrants, vehicle reported clean. Her GPS unit was still powered on, displaying coordinates that matched what dispatch had given me: 35.6532 degree N, 83.5070 degree W. The passenger seat told a story of obsessive research. Photocopied newspaper articles from the Saviorville Tribune dating back to 1924 were scattered across faded upholstery. Hand-drawn maps covered in red ink annotations, a leather-bound journal stuffed with photographs, documents, and loose papers. I photographed everything with my digital camera before disturbing the scene, then carefully gathered her research materials. The newspaper clippings were yellowed and fragile, but the headlines were clear enough. Mysterious fire destroys local theater, dated October 31st, 1924. Actor dies on stage during Hamlet performance, from the same date. Search continues for missing theater company, dated November 15th, 1924. According to the articles, a traveling theater company called the Eldridge Players had constructed a temporary wooden theater in a remote valley for a 3-week run of classic plays. On the final night during their performance of Hamlet, the lead actor Vincent Ashworth had collapsed and died during the famous "to be or not to be" soliloquy. The theater had burned to the ground hours later under mysterious circumstances, and the rest of the company had vanished without a trace. But here's what didn't make sense. I'd been patrolling this area for over 20 years. I knew every trail, every ridge, every creek bed. There was no valley where a theater could have been built, temporary or otherwise. The terrain didn't support it. Sarah's journal was filled with increasingly frantic handwriting. Early entries from 3 months ago were neat and academic. Researching the folklore of disappeared theaters in Appalachian region for dissertation. Local legends suggest at least 12 different traveling companies vanished between 1880 and 1930. But the later entries grew more erratic. Found death certificates for 3 missing hikers, 1987, 1994, 2003. All disappeared in same general area as alleged theater location. Local librarian claims no theater ever existed here, but evidence suggests otherwise. Her final entry, dated yesterday, was barely legible. Going to coordinates tonight. Theater appears at dusk to those who seek it. Vincent still performs nightly, but he needs a supporting cast. I can hear them rehearsing in my dreams. God help me, I can hear them calling my name. I radioed my position to dispatch. Unit 23 on scene at Cataract Falls. Subject's vehicle located, no signs of distress. Beginning trail search. ETA for additional units. Unit 23, Sheriff's Department has 2 deputies en route, ETA 30 minutes. State Park Service has a helicopter on standby if needed. I shouldered my pack and began hiking the main trail. The Cataract Falls Trail was well maintained, popular with day hikers and families. I'd walked it countless times with Emma and Sophie, pointing out wildflowers and animal tracks. But this morning, the familiar path felt alien. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees since I'd left the parking area, and my breath formed small clouds in the air, despite the weather forecast calling for a high of 72 degrees. After half a mile, the trail split. Left continued toward the documented waterfall system that gave the trail its name. Right led to what should have been a steep ravine and dead end, terrain I'd mapped myself during my first year as a ranger. But Sarah's boot prints led right, clear as day in the soft earth, and they weren't alone. Beside her size 7 hiking boots were drag marks, as if something had been guiding her steps. I followed the tracks, pulling out my GPS to mark waypoints. The readings made no sense. According to my unit, I was walking through solid rock, heading toward coordinates that placed me 300 feet underground. I tried radioing dispatch but got only static. My cell phone showed no signal, which was unusual but not unheard of in the deeper parts of the mountains. The temperature continued to drop as I followed Sarah's trail. Frost began forming on the leaves around me, and my breath came out in visible puffs. The sounds of the forest, bird calls, rustling leaves, distant streams, gradually faded until the only sound was my boots crunching on crystallizing ground cover. Then I smelled it. Old wood smoke, aged fabric, and something else that made my skin crawl. Grease paint. The thick, waxy smell of theatrical makeup that hadn't been used in decades. The ravine that should have dropped away instead opened into a perfectly circular valley, maybe 200 yards across, as if carved by unnatural hands. Ancient oak trees formed a natural amphitheater around the edges, their branches intertwining overhead like a cathedral ceiling. And there, in the center of this impossible geography, stood the remnants of a wooden theater. I stopped dead in my tracks, my training warring with my eyes. The structure was real. Weathered clapboard siding, a partially collapsed roof with gaping holes that revealed darkness beyond, doorways that seemed to lead into shadows deeper than mere absence of light. Victorian-era architecture, the kind of temporary theater that traveling companies might have erected for short runs in remote areas. But it couldn't be here. I'd surveyed this terrain myself. There was no valley here. I pulled out my digital camera and began documenting everything, following standard search and rescue protocol even though every instinct screamed that nothing about this situation was standard. The theater was roughly 60 feet wide by 40 feet deep, with a raised stage visible through the main entrance. Faded posters still clung to the exterior walls, advertising performances by the Eldritch Players in elaborate Victorian typography. Sarah's backpack lay open in front of the main entrance, contents spilled across the ground as if she'd been searching for something frantically. Her water bottle, energy bars, extra socks, emergency whistle, all the gear of a prepared hiker, but also theater programs, more photocopied articles, and a small digital recorder. I pressed play on the recorder. Sarah's voice, excited but nervous. October 15th, 6:23 p.m. I found it. The theater is exactly where the coordinates indicated, but it's impossible. The valley isn't on any topographical map. The structure appears to be original 1920s construction, but the wood shows minimal decay despite nearly a century of exposure to elements. A pause, then. I can hear something inside. Voices, I think. Or maybe just whine through the rafters. I'm going in. The recording continued with the sound of footsteps on wooden floors. Then Sarah's voice again, more distant. The interior is better preserved than the exterior suggests. Stage, orchestra pit, even some original seats. There are programs scattered everywhere, all for the same play. Hamlet, October 31st, 1924. Final performance. A long pause, then whispered, "Oh God. There's someone here." The recording ended with static. I tried my radio again. "Dispatch Unit 23. I've located the subject's equipment at coordinates. Hell, I don't know what coordinates. GPS is malfunctioning. Found what appears to be a historical structure, investigating." More static, then a voice that sounded like mine but wasn't quite right. "The show must go on, Michael. She's waiting for her cue." I jerked the radio away from my ear. Dispatch knew me as Mike or Unit 23, never Michael. And the voice, while similar to mine, had an odd cadence. Theatrical, trained, like an actor projecting to the back row. I approached the theater entrance, hand instinctively moving to my service weapon. The main door stood open, revealing an interior that defied the external decay. Inside, rows of wooden seats faced a raised stage where impossible light seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere at once. Gas-style footlights lined the stage edge, glowing with steady flames despite no visible gas lines. Dust motes danced in the air like tiny performers, and I could hear something that made my blood run cold. Whispers, not quite words, but the rhythm of blank verse, iambic pentameter spoken by voices that had no breath behind them. "Sarah," I called out. "Sarah Williams, this is Ranger Carter." My voice echoed strangely in the space, as if the acoustics were designed to transform sound into something more dramatic, more theatrical. From somewhere in the darkness beyond the stage, I heard a response. Officer Carter. The voice was cultured, theatrical, with the careful diction of a trained actor from another era. How good of you to join us. Your Sarah has such potential. A natural actress, really. She understands the eternal nature of true performance. I drew my weapon, though some rational part of my mind questioned what good it would do against whatever I was facing. This is Ranger Mike Carter with the National Park Service. Show yourself and release Sarah Williams immediately. Laughter echoed from the stage, rich and melodious and completely insane. A figure stepped into the strange light, tall and gaunt, wearing a black Victorian-era costume that should have rotted away decades ago. His face was pale as parchment, with sharp cheekbones and dark eyes that held no life, only the burning intensity of someone who had forgotten how to die. Vincent Ashworth, I breathed, recognizing him from the old newspaper photographs in Sarah's research. At your service, he replied with a theatrical bow, though I must say, the years have been educational. Do you know what I've learned in nearly a century of death, Ranger Carter? I've learned that every story needs an ending, but the truly great stories, the ones that matter, never actually end. They simply find new performers to carry them forward. Behind him, shadowy figures moved in the wings. Other victims, I realized with growing horror. Other performers in his endless play. I caught glimpses of faces I recognized from missing person reports dating back decades. Hikers who had vanished in this area, presumed dead, lost to the wilderness that claims a few unlucky souls each year. All wearing period costumes, all staring with empty, rehearsing eyes. Where is Sarah Williams? I demanded, keeping my weapon trained on Vincent even though I suspected bullets would be useless. She's preparing for her entrance, Vincent replied. Such dedication to her craft. She came to us voluntarily, you know. Sought us out with her research, called to us with her academic passion. The theater chooses its performers, Officer Carter, and once chosen, he gestured grandly to the shadows behind him. Sarah stepped onto the stage wearing a flowing white dress that seemed to glow with its own light. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate Victorian style, and her eyes reflected the same theatrical madness as Vincent's. When she spoke, her voice carried the trained cadence of classical theater. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them? Sarah, it's Ranger Carter. I'm here to help you. But she looked right through me, lost in the role, lost in the performance that would never end. Vincent smiled, showing teeth that were too white, too sharp. To be or not to be, he continued, picking up Hamlet's soliloquy where Sarah had left off. That is the question. But you see, my dear Ranger, we have discovered the answer. To be, always to be, forever to be. Death is merely another stage direction, and the show must always go on. I had two choices: retreat and call for backup that might never come, or enter the theater and try to rescue Sarah from whatever supernatural compulsion held her. 23 years of Ranger training said retreat, assess, plan. But the look in Sarah's eyes, empty, rehearsing, lost, made that choice impossible. I holstered my weapon and stepped into the theater. The moment I crossed the threshold, the outside world disappeared. Not gradually, not as if doors had closed behind me, but instantaneously, completely. The autumn forest, the natural light, the sounds of wind through trees, all vanished as if they had never existed. I was inside Vincent Ashworth's domain now, inside a space where natural laws bent to theatrical needs. The interior was larger than the exterior suggested, with ornate Victorian details that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. Gas lamps flickered along the walls, casting dancing shadows that moved independently of their flames. The seats were arranged in perfect rows, all facing the stage where Vincent and Sarah continued their performance, other shadowy figures joining them for a production of Hamlet that had been running for nearly a century. Ah, Vincent said without breaking character. Our audience grows. Ladies and gentlemen of the company, we have a new patron. Perhaps A new member? The other performers, the missing hikers, the vanished visitors, turned to look at me with those same empty, rehearsing eyes. I recognized some of them from missing person photographs. Janet Morrison disappeared in 1987, David Kim vanished in 1994, Rebecca Santos lost in 2003. All still wearing the clothes they disappeared in, but over those normal hiking clothes they now wore elements of period costume. Sashes, cloaks, jewelry that belonged to another century. I tried to back toward the entrance, but when I turned around there was no doorway. Just more theater, extending in directions that violated geometry. The space had trapped me the moment I'd entered, just as it had trapped all the others. The famous soliloquy, Vincent continued, his voice now addressing me directly while Sarah and the others remained frozen in tableau around him. But do you know the real question it poses, Ranger Carter? Not whether to be or not to be. That question was settled long ago. The real question is whether to accept the role you've been given, or to fight against the script until you drive yourself mad. My radio crackled, somehow receiving signal despite the impossible nature of my location. Unit 23, this is dispatch. Report your position. We're showing null readings on your GPS. I grabbed for the radio, but Vincent's voice overrode everything. All the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. The radio went dead, the static fading into silence that felt oppressive, waiting. I've been watching you for years, Michael Carter, Vincent said, beginning to pace across the stage like a director addressing his cast. 23 years of perfect rescues, 23 years of bringing everyone home safely. Do you know what that makes you? It makes you heroic. And every great play needs a hero. I'm not performing in your goddamn play, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. The theater seemed to absorb my words, transform them, make them part of the script. Vincent laughed again, that rich, insane sound that echoed in dimensions I couldn't perceive. My dear Ranger, you've been performing your entire life. The noble protector, the devoted family man, the competent professional who never fails. But what happens when the hero finally faces something he cannot overcome? What happens when the perfect record meets the impossible situation? That, my friend, is where the real drama begins. Sarah moved closer to the edge of the stage, her empty eyes focused on something beyond my shoulder. When she spoke, it was still in that trained theatrical voice. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. But for just a moment, underneath the classical cadence, I heard her real voice. Help me. That's when I understood. They weren't completely lost. Somewhere underneath the supernatural compulsion, the real people were still there, trapped but aware, forced to perform while their true selves screamed silently. The missing hikers, Sarah, all of them, prisoners in their own bodies, condemned to eternal performance in Vincent's mad theater. You son of a bitch, I said. And this time my voice carried the authority of 23 years of wilderness law enforcement. Let them go. Vincent applauded, slow and deliberate. Magnificent. Such passion, such righteous anger. You see, this is exactly what our production has been missing. Genuine emotion, real stakes. The others came to us broken, lost, desperate. But you come to us complete, heroic, with everything to lose. Your performance will be transcendent. The gas lamps flared brighter, and I could see more details of the theater now, programs scattered across the floor, all advertising the same performance. The Eldritch Players present Hamlet, October 31st, 1924, final performance. Costume pieces hanging from the balcony railings, and everywhere, photographs, missing person photos pinned to the walls like a gallery of captured souls. My photo was there too, I realized with growing horror. A recent one, probably from the Park Service website. Under it, in Vincent's flowing handwriting, Michael Carter, the hero. Final casting complete. This is insane, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I felt something changing in my mind. The theater was working on me, rewriting my thoughts, making me understand that resistance was futile, that acceptance was easier, that the show really must go on. Insanity, Vincent mused, is simply another way of saying that someone has chosen to follow a different script than the one society expects. But here, in our eternal theater, there is only one script that matters. The one where you choose to save Sarah Williams, where you risk everything for a stranger, where you prove that heroes really do exist. Isn't that what you've always wanted? To be the hero of the story? My phone buzzed. A text from Linda. Emma's practicing your favorite piece for tonight. She keeps asking if you'll be there. Please don't break her heart. The normal world felt like a dream I was struggling to remember while this nightmare theater tried to write me into its cast. But that message, that connection to my real life, my real family, my real responsibilities, it gave me strength to fight the compulsion. I thought of Emma's violin music filling our house this morning, of Sophie's purple horses, of Linda's vanilla-scented coffee kisses. I thought of promises made and promises I intended to keep. No, I said, and the word carried power that made the gas lamps flicker. I'm not playing your game. Vincent's smile never wavered, but something dangerous flickered in his dead eyes. Oh, but you are, my dear Ranger. You've been playing since the moment you entered our valley. The only question now is whether you'll play the hero who saves everyone, or the tragic hero who fails magnificently. Either way, the curtain falls, and you never leave. The theater began to change around me, reality bending to accommodate Vincent's vision of drama. The stage expanded, growing larger and more elaborate, while the audience seating multiplied until hundreds of empty chairs faced the performance area. But they weren't empty for long. Translucent figures began filling the seats, the ghosts of everyone who had ever attended a performance here, drawn back by the supernatural magnetism of Vincent's eternal show. Ladies and gentlemen, Vincent announced to his ghostly audience, tonight we present a very special performance, a true story of heroism and sacrifice, performed by our newest cast member, Ranger Michael Carter. I found myself moving toward the stage against my will, my feet carrying me forward despite every mental command to retreat. The compulsion was stronger now, more focused, as if the theater itself was rewriting the neural pathways in my brain. Sarah and the other prisoners arranged themselves around me, and I could see the real people trapped behind their theatrical masks. Janet Morrison silently pleading with her eyes, David Kim's mouth forming the word run, even as his body moved to Vincent's direction. Your motivation is simple, Vincent continued, circling me like a director preparing his lead actor. Sarah Williams, brilliant, young, full of potential, has been taken by forces beyond her control. You, the experienced ranger, the man who has never lost anyone, must choose between saving her and saving yourself. Classic dramatic tension. My radio crackled to life again, but this time it was Linda's voice. Mike? Mike, are you there? Emma keeps asking when you're coming home. She's been practicing all day for you. It was impossible. Linda didn't have access to Park Service radio frequencies, but Vincent smiled and I understood that he was manipulating reality itself, using my connections to the outside world as puppet strings. Touching, Vincent said. A devoted family waiting at home. But here's your dilemma, hero. To save Sarah, you must stay and play your part. To return to your family, you must abandon her to eternal performance. Choose wisely. The audience is waiting. I tried to speak, to refuse, but found that words were coming out of my mouth without my permission. To be or not to be, that is the question. Vincent's script was taking control, forcing me to participate in his mad performance. But as the familiar words left my lips, I realized something. If I was being forced to perform Hamlet, then I knew how this story ended. And maybe, just maybe, I could use that knowledge. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, I continued. But I was thinking furiously, trying to remember everything I could about the play. Hamlet was a tragedy, yes, but it was also a story about someone fighting against forces beyond his control, someone trying to save others even at the cost of his own life. If Vincent wanted me to be the hero of this story, then I'd be the hero, but on my terms, not his. Or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. As I spoke the line, I made my choice. Not the choice Vincent expected, but the choice a real hero would make. I drew my service weapon, not to threaten Vincent. Bullets couldn't harm something that was already dead, but to threaten the one thing he valued most, his eternal performance. "This theater exists because you will it to exist," I said, breaking from the script for the first time since entering the building. "The valley, the impossible geography, all of it. It's sustained by your need to perform, your refusal to let the show end. But what happens if there's no audience? What happens if there's no theater?" Vincent's composed expression flickered for the first time, uncertainty replacing his theatrical confidence. "You wouldn't dare. Destroy this place, and you destroy your only hope of rescue. Sarah and the others will be lost forever." "Maybe," I admitted, keeping my weapon trained on the gas lamps that provided the theater's supernatural illumination. "But maybe that's better than letting you add more victims to your cast. Maybe sometimes the hero's job isn't to save everyone, it's to make sure the monster can't hurt anyone else." I fired 3 shots into the main gas line feeding the stage lights. The effect was immediate and catastrophic, not just an explosion but a fundamental unraveling of the reality Vincent had constructed. The theater began to collapse, not physically but conceptually, as if the idea of the building was forgetting how to exist. Vincent screamed, but it wasn't just anger, it was genuine terror. For the first time in nearly a century, his perfect, eternal performance was being interrupted. "You don't understand," he shouted over the sound of reality tearing. "Without the theater, without the performance, they'll be truly dead. Here at least they continue to exist." "But they don't exist," I replied, grabbing Sarah's hand, as the theatrical compulsion began to fade from her eyes. "They're prisoners, and sometimes freedom is worth the risk." The ghostly audience was disappearing, fading like morning mist. The other performers, Janet, David, Rebecca, all the missing people from decades past, began to look around in confusion as Vincent's control weakened. Some of them simply vanished, finally released to whatever comes after death. Others, the more recent victims, remained solid and real. "Sarah," I shouted over the chaos. "Sarah Williams, can you hear me?" Her eyes focused on me for the first time since I'd entered the theater, the theatrical madness fading to reveal the terrified graduate student underneath. "Ranger Carter? Where are we?" I was researching the theater, and then she looked around at the collapsing supernatural architecture, at Vincent writhing in agony as his century-long performance finally ended. "Oh God, what is this place?" "Somewhere that shouldn't exist," I said, pulling her toward what I hoped was still an exit. "But it's ending now." Vincent made one last desperate attempt to maintain his dominion, grabbing my arm with fingers that felt like ice and bone. "You cannot destroy a century of art. You cannot silence the greatest performance ever staged." I looked into his eyes, no longer the confident gaze of a master actor, but the desperate pleading of someone facing the final curtain. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "The show's over, Vincent," I said. "Time to take your bow." The theater gave one final shuddering collapse, and then we were standing in normal forest again. Sarah, myself, and 3 other hikers who had been reported missing in recent years. Vincent Ashworth was gone, and with him, the impossible valley and the theater that had trapped souls for nearly a century. Chapter 5. Curtain call. My GPS unit started working again, showing our coordinates as exactly where they should be according to the topographical maps. The autumn forest looked normal, sounded normal, smelled normal. Pine and earth and the distant hint of wood smoke from someone's campfire. Sarah was unconscious but breathing, suffering from dehydration and exposure, but otherwise unharmed. The other rescued hikers were in similar condition, confused and disoriented but alive. I radioed for emergency medical support and additional rangers, giving coordinates that actually made sense for the first time in hours. While we waited for the helicopter, I tried to piece together what had happened, both for my official report and for my own sanity. The other survivors remembered fragments, being lost on the trail, finding a strange building, entering it despite every instinct telling them not to. After that, their memories became confused, dreamlike. They remembered performing, remembered being trapped in roles they couldn't escape. but the details faded like dreams in daylight. Sarah's memories were clearer, probably because she'd been there the shortest time. I found historical evidence that the theater existed, she told me, as we waited for evacuation. Not just newspaper accounts, but land deeds, construction permits, even photographs. But when I tried to verify the information, nobody had any record of it. It was as if the historical evidence existed in isolation, disconnected from the normal flow of documented history. "What made you come here?" I asked. "What made you believe the theater was real when everyone else said it wasn't?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the spot where the impossible valley had been. "Because I could hear it," she said finally. "In my apartment, late at night, when I was working on my research. I could hear voices rehearsing, calling to me. Vincent's voice mostly, but others too. They were lonely, Ranger Carter. They'd been performing the same play for a century, and they were so terribly lonely." The helicopter arrived 20 minutes later, followed by additional Park Service personnel and a sheriff's department team. The official story would be simple. 5 missing hikers found suffering from exposure and dehydration, probably victims of a flash flood that had disoriented them. No mention of impossible theaters or century-old actors. No mention of supernatural performances or trapped souls. But as I watched the helicopter carry Sarah and the others to safety, I found myself looking back at the forest where the theater had been. There was nothing there now, just trees and underbrush and the normal geography of the Smoky Mountains. But I could swear I heard something on the wind, distant applause, fading like an echo of an echo, as if somewhere in the spaces between reality, a very long performance had finally come to an end. I made it home by 6:30 p.m., in time for dinner and Emma's violin recital. Linda hugged me longer than usual, as if she sensed that something significant had happened during my day. Emma played beautifully, Bach's Air on the G string, the same piece she'd been practicing that morning. Sophie showed me 3 new purple horses she'd drawn while I was gone. Normal life, normal family, normal promises kept. But that night, after everyone was asleep, I sat in my study and wrote the real report. The one that would never be filed, never be read by anyone except myself. I documented everything. The impossible geography, the supernatural theater, Vincent Ashworth's century-long performance, the rescue of victims presumed dead. I printed it out, sealed it in an envelope, and locked it in my personal safe, because someday, maybe years from now, another ranger might get a call about missing hikers in the Cataract Falls area. Another graduate student might start researching local legends about abandoned theaters. And when that happens, they'll need to know the truth about what waits in the spaces between reality, still hungry for new performers, still believing that the show must go on. My name is Mike Carter, and I've been a ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 23 years. I've never lost anyone on my watch, but I've learned that some rescues require more than training and equipment. They require the willingness to step onto a stage where the script was written long before you were born, and find the courage to change the ending. The show is over now, the curtain has fallen, But in the quiet moments between sleep and waking, when the wind moves through the mountains just right, I sometimes think I can still hear applause drifting down from the ridgelines. Not the desperate applause of trapped souls, but the satisfied applause of an audience that has finally seen a story reach its proper conclusion. And sometimes, if I listen very carefully, I can hear Sarah's voice carrying across the darkness, no longer trapped in endless performance, but free to tell her own story, to write her own lines, to live her own life beyond the reach of those who would make her dance to their ancient, terrible music. The theater is gone. The performance is over. The missing have been found. But the mountains remember everything. And somewhere in their ancient memory, the echo of Vincent Ashworth's final bow still resonates. Not in triumph, but in the quiet dignity of an actor who has finally learned when to leave the stage. Dr. Sarah Williams, now Dr. Sarah Williams Chen, published her doctoral dissertation on performative trauma and collective memory in Appalachian folklore to significant academic acclaim. She never mentioned the real reason for her research, never discussed the 3 days she lost in October 2018, never spoke publicly about the supernatural theater that had trapped her in an eternal performance. But she did establish a foundation for missing persons in national parks, working closely with park rangers and search and rescue teams to develop new protocols for locating lost hikers. Her work has helped find dozens of missing people, each rescue a small victory against the darkness that waits in the wild places of the world. She sent me a copy of her dissertation with a handwritten note. For Ranger Carter, who taught me that sometimes the most important performance is knowing when to stop acting and start living. Thank you for changing the script. The other survivors recovered completely, though none of them ever returned to the mountains. They moved to cities, took jobs in office buildings, lived lives surrounded by concrete and steel and the reassuring sounds of traffic and human activity. They never spoke of what they'd experienced, but sometimes they would wake in the middle of the night, convinced they could hear distant voices rehearsing lines from a play that should have ended a century ago. As for me, I continue to patrol the Smoky Mountains, responding to search and rescue calls, bringing lost hikers safely home. My record remains perfect. 28 years now without losing anyone. Emma is in college studying music education, hoping to become a high school band director. Sophie is in middle school, still drawing horses, though they come in more realistic colors now. Linda still makes coffee with vanilla creamer every morning. I still promise to be home for dinner. Some traditions are worth preserving, but I watch the forests more carefully now. Listen more intently to the stories locals tell about places that shouldn't exist. Pay closer attention to the reports of hikers who claim to have found historical sites that aren't on any official maps, because I know the truth that most people don't want to acknowledge. The world is far stranger than we pretend, full of spaces where different rules apply, where the past refuses to stay buried, where some stories have been waiting centuries for the right person to give them a proper ending. My name is Mike Carter, and I'm a ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains. I bring people home safely. It's what I do, what I've always done, what I'll continue to do until the day I retire. But I also know that some rescues happen not in the wilderness but in the spaces between reality and dream, between performance and truth, between the roles we're forced to play and the people we choose to be. The show must go on, they say, but sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is make sure it finally ends. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Sarah Williams and the other missing hikers. I read every single one. What did you think of Vincent Ashworth's Eternal Theater? Would you have made the same choice as Mike Carter? Share your thoughts below.